Welcome to APA Wisconsin's video series, where we interview our great people from around the state to share valuable stories with you. I am Jason Gilman, APA Wisconsin President. Today it is my privilege to introduce to you Heather Cleveland, the founder and owner of Green Bicycle Company in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Heather is also the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for APA Wisconsin. Well, it is a great privilege to meet with Heather Cleveland of the Green Bicycle Company today for APA Wisconsin. And thank you. I want to thank you for hosting our board meeting today. This was really a wonderful location for everybody to get to see Sheboygan and your business. And one of the things I always start with in these videos is just tell us a little bit about your passions and what you really like to work on.
So my passion is community and people, but I would say it started earlier with the environment. I've always been passionate about the environment, and perhaps always kind of looked for a way to engage that and improve it. And my background is in environmental and civil engineering, and in that experience kind of struggled with how can I be proactive in that. And so went on to school for urban planning, and then fast forward a whole bunch. I've always just sought to find ways to engage with the community to make things better, to make the world. I have a skill for hearing different perspectives and being able to put that together and to find a common direction that will be mutually beneficial. Yeah. And then being involved with Engineers Without Borders, that's where my level of consciousness of involving the community in any sort of design was completely elevated. Because we did water distribution projects for villages in Guatemala, and it was critical there and this is what we taught the students, is it's not just about the design, it's also about involving the people in the conversations. Right. And ensuring that the things are resourced locally. And so I guess having that outside example and having traveled to different parts of the world and worked in different parts of the world, I just saw how critical that was.
If you were to give advice to like another planner, especially maybe a person that's just setting out to do this type of work, community engagement as it relates to planning, what would you say the skill sets are?
Seek out the different perspectives. And I think not being afraid of change. So things like change is inevitable. So I think sometimes we get a bit stuck and I had mentioned this earlier in our board meeting, we get a bit stuck in enforcement of this is the rule. But it's kind of like, is that rule still applicable? How do you collect that information and then find patterns to make recommendations? So that is something that we do. So we like to have quantitative and qualitative information, but don't get so stuck on the quantitative. Hear those stories. Be willing to be open to the conversation and let it go in different directions. Right. And then kind of take a step back, and we have on our team systems thinkers who can look at that and kind of start to pull out those patterns and those pieces that kind of keep coming up and say, what is this telling us?
I mean, it's a lot of hard work too, but there has to be some rewards. And what would you say is like a project or something you worked on that you're very proud of?
So we recently had a project. It was called Telling the Full History, and it was a collaboration with the Sheboygan County Historical Society Museum. And it was a grant through the National Endowment for the Humanities, and this is the shift. Yeah. Not necessarily to have the end product be at the museum, but to kind of shift the thinking that help other people tell their stories and have that be the function. Visited with the Hmong community in their different groups, starting with the Hmong Mutual Assistance Association. So, one of the Hmong Women's Society and the Hmong community's leaders had passed away. Her name is Yer Yang, and before she passed away, she wrote a play about the history of the Hmong culture. And they wanted to put on that play in honor of her to kind of finish the project. And so the idea was to give them the tools and make the connections to help make that possible. And then once you kind of just have some faith and move something a little bit forward, not perfect, a little bit forward, suddenly somebody from the Hmong community that was going to be the lead actors had just graduated with a degree in filmmaking, took the lead and became the director of this play. So within 5 or 6 weeks, pulled it all together. So they put this play on, and it's something that's going to live on forever. It was recorded. It was on the Hmong television station on YouTube, and I just felt like we helped somebody do something that they wanted to do.
It sounds to me like your process led to a certain level of trust with the people that you were working with. How do you build trust with people through engagement?
I think it's through authenticity, and also being willing to walk away and let go. I like to call it like the stars aligning. Hey, if this works out, and I think it did take a couple meetings of showing up, being there, said this is what I'm here to help you with, and also I didn't come in with an agenda. I came to say, I'm here to help you with whatever you want help with.
Earlier today, when we were talking about Green Bicycle Company, you mentioned the phrase radical inclusion. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's because I think what I've observed, and I know that these rules were put into place, for example, public comment on plans, and we have certain procedures in place that we're obligated to do, and I think it's not enough. It's the bare minimum. And so how can we be more inclusive on feedback, true feedback? And the groups that I see often left out, an example, there's many, but one example is youth. So how can, for example, when we're preparing a plan, how can we weave the concept in that plan or the feedback on that plan or some sort of exercise with developing that plan with a class in a school? Because sometimes it seems too that I know there's struggles within the school district of teaching to the test when there's all these practical situations happening that I think the youth have great insight on, and they're simply not being asked.
Given the immense amount of time demands in people's lives, that it's become, we have to be much more thoughtful about how we engage people. So what would you say about that?
I think if we create space, there's a lot of good ideas, and I think it will make it easier in the end because the outcome will be, there'll be more buy-in for the outcome.
Heather offered a unique opportunity to interview Green Bicycle Company's intern Nora, an aspiring planner headed to UW-Madison next
Nora,
semester.
Thanks for joining us today. And made you decide to work at Green Bicycle Company?
So I've always had a vested interest in local government and just like local politics and decision making. And I ended up getting an email on like my school email just offering an internship, and it talked about everything that I prioritized. How do we instill a sense of community amongst our county and our different cities, and how do we kind of give a voice to those who don't have one, and how do we ensure that there is inclusion and accessibility in our cities? And so I ended up applying, and then I started my work here, and it's been everything that I've wanted because it's given me opportunities to network and to further my education and my knowledge on planning. Because oftentimes we are so wrapped up in our cell phones and our social media usage that we don't take a minute and step back and think and assess the world around us and assess our relationships and what's going on. And so what Green Bicycle does is we kind of shed a light on this is how we should be living, or this is a more thoughtful way of living, and here's how you can attain that.
I would also like to ask you, based on your experience at Green Bicycle Company, what you are hopeful for in the future for cities and planning.
Here we work a lot with active transportation, and that's something that I've always been interested in. And so I hope that there is, infrastructure that is implemented that's directly suited for active transportation, that promotes it and encourages it and allows for maybe businesses to incentivize the active transportation, and that we get to a point where we have people who want to do that and that is their main form of getting around. And then additionally, I think accessibility in the housing market and ensuring that we have affordability.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Green Bicycle Company and your sort of holistic approach to community planning. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so a part of it is related to this business model. So it's an XYZ business. So we have the retail, the consulting, and the experiences. And I feel like if you're only working in consulting, whether it be urban planning or engineering, and you never engage with the community in another way, it's kind of narrow. So here, I might run into you because you're in the shop and you're interested in making sourdough, or you want a pannier bag for your bicycle. That's the retail kind of interaction, but we're still two human beings, and you're involved in things and I'm involved in things, and that was a human interaction. And then also you're going to happen to be exposed to one of the projects that we're working on, and you'll recognize me. Oh, that's because the values, there's a common thread of the values. The experiences part of it is again something that I saw missing. It just like felt like nobody could pick it up. The nonprofits couldn't pick it up if they didn't have a grant for it. The government didn't have the capacity for it, or didn't have the buy-in necessarily. The companies, again, there was just kind of this disconnect. So the experience is part of the business, and we're just getting started with some of them that we feel are aligned with the work that we're doing. And one of those is the Sheboygan Active Transportation. And so a group of people came together, and it was 3 of us to start. It was Kate Krause, who's the owner of Paradigm, Braden Schmidt, who works at Kohler, who came here and was looking for a community where he could actively, and he's a young professional, but he wanted a place where he could walk and bike and be connected. And so the 3 of us got together and formed Sheboygan Active Transportation, and this was bringing back Bike and Walk Week. We had it last year, and then we just ended it this last week. And so I think that's another example of not just reaching out to people when we have a survey, but reaching out to them and building community on a regular basis. So that Sheboygan Active Transportation has a leadership group that meets once a month, but together we organize events. For example, we have the Critical Mass Bike Ride that organizes, in addition to the Bike and Walk Week, we also have then from May through October, and then 2 special events in November and December. The last Friday of every month, we organize a bike ride that leaves from the Uptown Parklet, and then we go to different destinations. And what's been really cool about that is oftentimes people who join us are people who are new to the community and looking to meet people. And then they're introduced to different parts of the neighborhood, and we bring them on kind of well-known bike paths, but then also not so known well bike paths, and then also areas of concern. So then come full circle when we're looking to request comments or feedback on the long-range transportation plan, or for example, a bike ped plan. Those folks have already engaged together. We've already talked about it. Like, hey, when we went through that intersection and it was a bit of a struggle, like what could be done? And that allows us to have a conversation because we've already experienced it together.
This is kind of cultural change, isn't it? Or maybe cultural improvement. And that takes a lot of vigilance and a lot of work, but would you say that that might be part of the end product of good planning and the work that Green Bicycle Company is doing?
I think so, and I think it's leading by example, and I think it's also taking pieces of positive work that I've seen in other communities and bringing it here and helping connect.
So I wanted to ask you about, now when you stand here on, we're on 8th Street in Sheboygan, and you think about Wisconsin as a whole. So we've got 500 members of APA and people in the public and private nonprofit sector throughout the state. What would you say are some of the common challenges and opportunities Wisconsin cities are facing, and then how what are some things that we should be thinking about as a profession?
When I think about 8th Street, I think about small businesses. I think about the downtowns and uptowns and what have you being the heart of the city, and I also think about the historic buildings and how can we invest in those and maintain those, and because as we look, and I think this is a conversation not just throughout the state of Wisconsin but throughout the country, is a lot of older buildings were knocked down for parking, and when do we stop? More walking and biking, the heart of downtown and small businesses. How do we put more investment in that? And I didn't even mention, how do we, when we have competition for small businesses, retailers, for example, competing with online sales, it's like, how do we choose to spend our money, and how do we, help support those small businesses, which,
Right.
And I've heard a lot of people talk about this, is the small businesses are the ones that are sponsoring the Little League teams.
So I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been a wonderful interview, and
Yes, you're welcome.
it's been a pleasure
Thanks for having
talking
me.
to you.